This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. I am your host, Frances Hogan. Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. We're now going to chapter 7 of John, and we are coming into the Feast of Tabernacles. So we're now deep into the Gospel, and John is preparing us for the events of the Passion, Death, and Resurrection of Jesus. The mood of tension between Jesus and the leadership becomes sustained now. And in chapter 7 and chapter 8, we have a very serious battle between Jesus and the leadership, which we will deal with in the controversies. The opponents, the people who are opposing Jesus, become very agitated and loud and accusing and all the rest of it. But Jesus remains calm and he remains in control. And he, because he's on the level of above, that he is faithful to his Father's mission. He will only do his Father's will, and he will continue to reveal his Father's love. Now, at this stage, after 5 signs, 3 discourses to Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman, the Galilean crowds, and the witnesses that were given to us in chapter 5 of John, we, the readers, know an awful lot more than the people involved in this controversy. We also have the prologue to help us that gave us so much information about Jesus. We know where he came from. We know who he is. Now, in these dialogues, they're going to be saying, who are you and where have you come from? And even when he has told them a few times, they will still ask him again because they don't accept what he's actually saying. We have seen the people take different sides. Some are on the side of light and some are on the side of darkness. Some accept the light and some reject the light. For some people, Jesus is offering too little, and for others, he's offering too much. Now, the people who are opposing him in chapter 7 and 8, they're the ones who consider that Jesus is offering too much. He's claiming too much. He wants to be the source of the new life. He wants to be the new wine. He wants to be the living water. He wants to be the bread from heaven. He wants to give eternal life. These are claims only God can make. The Judean leaders know exactly what the issues are. They know what he's saying. They just don't accept it. John wants us to see that the death that Jesus suffered at the end of the gospel was no accident. It was deliberately orchestrated by the people who chose darkness over the light, and they became more and more blind as they went along. So as we go from here in chapter 7, 8, 9 and 10, it will appear superficially as if the darkness is winning. But if you see it from things from the above level, it will be very different. And if you remember, of course, John 1:5, the darkness will not overcome the light. But of course, the darkness will try to overcome the light. When in chapter 18, we see Jesus surrender into the hands of his enemies, it will appear as if he's allowing darkness to overcome the light. And so the people who have tried to accept him and tried to understand him are going to be very, very puzzled. Even the apostles will run away. We've just had Peter speaking on behalf of the apostles. There's nowhere to go to. There's nobody else. That you're the only one. And yet when they meet this desperate challenge of darkness, apparently overcoming the light in Gethsemane, they too will run away temporarily. So there in the Passion, the powers of darkness will think that they have won the day. They have the upper hand. But in reality, what's going on, if only you have eyes to see, is that the Father is accomplishing the salvation of the world through, with, and in his Son. At the time of these events is not seen either by the people, even the apostles, or the demon. Nobody seems to see what's going on. It takes the resurrection to open the eyes of the blind. Now, in the great controversies that follow in these chapters, the darkness is going to show itself in the sheer refusal to see, in the stubborn unwillingness to recognize any good in Jesus, to recognize any truth in his claims, even though he has fulfilled the scriptures and everything that the scriptures have said about the Messiah. The problem is actually too simple and terrifyingly simple. Jesus has the wrong address. They will not accept that a prophet comes from Nazareth, period. Not only that, but Jesus doesn't have a proper education. He has not been to their rabbinical schools. They haven't taught him. They didn't give him any degrees. So as far as they're concerned, he knows nothing. And they treat him contemptuously like that, and you will see this in chapter 8. He was only a layman. He was not appointed by them. He had the wrong followers. They were all nobodies. And their opinion, not only of the followers of Jesus, but of all lay people, is given in chapter 7, verse 49. That rabble, they know nothing. They're damned. That's an extraordinary way for leaders of a religion to treat the people who keep them in business and keep the whole religion alive. So, the conclusion that the leaders come to is that Jesus is earth-born, not heaven-born, that he's demon-possessed, not filled with the Holy Spirit, and that he's blasphemous. So they will kill him for that. Their wild accusations cause confusion among the people because, as far as the people are concerned, they are the religious leaders. They are the ones who should know, and yet they're the ones making these dreadful, dreadful accusations. This is all my introduction to the Feast of Tabernacles, because chapter 7 takes place in the context of the Feast of Tabernacles. Following 2 chapters are actually a great trial of Jesus of Nazareth. Tabernacles was an autumnal feast. It lasted 8 days. It was one of the 3 great pilgrimage feasts celebrated in Jerusalem, and all Jewish men were obliged to attend. During this feast, they commemorated the wandering in the wilderness, when the Lord was their light. He showed himself as the pillar of light. Therefore, even in modern times, they call it Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights. In Jesus' time, they combined water rites with a Feast of Lights, both. What the people did was that they thanked God for the blessings of a good harvest, and they asked God to give them the next harvest. They asked God to give them the new rains, okay? Now, we've already been introduced to the true harvest in chapter 4 and the teaching that John gave to us there. So during this feast, on the greatest day of the feast, they solemnly carried water from the pool of Siloam into the temple, and they brought it to the altar and they poured it on the altar, asking God to give them the rains for the next harvest. During the feast, for the whole 8 days, the temple was illuminated with light. They had huge vats in which they had candles in these vats, huge candles. And they lit up the temple so much that at night, where the people had very little light in their tiny houses, the temple was lit up like an extraordinary sign of God's wonderful, beautiful presence in their midst. And they just had to look at the temple, and they said to each other, God is our light. God is our light. So it was a time of thanksgiving and a time of renewal of the covenant. And during this time, the expectancy of Messiah always ran very, very high. This is what you read in Psalm 78, verses 15 and 16. God split the rocks in the desert, and he gave them water as abundant as the seas. He brought streams out of the craggy rock, and he made water run like rivers. Now, during this feast, therefore, they are expecting the Messiah, and the rabbis felt that the Messiah would fulfill Ezekiel's vision, which you find in Ezekiel chapter 47, of water flowing from the right-hand side of the temple and flowing out of Jerusalem and out into the rest of the world. Jesus is going to fulfill all of this, of course, but they're not going to see it. Some of them won't see it at all. Others will see it after the event. This is the occasion, and what better occasion could Jesus choose to tell them that he was the source of living water and that he was the light of the world. And the amazing thing is, Siloam had his name, the one sent. The one sent actually means the apostle, the one who represents somebody else. We've also learned, of course, in chapter 2 that Jesus is the new temple. And we know, because we're looking back, that the living waters will flow from Jerusalem in the passion of Jesus, when his heart is opened up for the world, that Jesus is in fact the rock that will be struck in order to give them these living waters. So let's begin to read a little bit of the text. This is John chapter 7. After this, Jesus stayed in Galilee. He could not stay in Judea because the Jews, that means the Jewish leaders, wanted to kill him. So, as the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles drew near, his brothers said to him, "Why not leave this place and go to Judea and let your disciples see the works that you are doing? If a man wants to be known, he doesn't do things in secret. Since you are doing all this, go and let the whole world see." And John's comment in verse 5 is, not even his brothers had faith in him. Okay. So who are these brothers of Jesus? We know from the Synoptic Gospels that the so-called brothers of Jesus are in fact cousins. There is still some dispute among scholars as to whether they are the children of Joseph's brother, and that's my position, that they're the children of Alphaeus, and that they grew up side by side with Jesus, next door to them, and so they were always together. And so they're called the brothers. But the Jewish people were tribal people, and everybody in your tribe was your brother and sister. And you find that in other countries where people have tribes as well. Your brother and sister is everybody in the tribe. And the head of the tribe is the father of all of them. In those days and in tribal countries, you have that the men are the leaders of the family. Now, back in Nazareth, Jesus has left his mother. Joseph is dead. And so his mother is all alone, living in her little house in Nazareth. So she would not be considered the head of anything. So it would be the eldest of the cousins who would actually be the head of this family. We actually know from Jesus' revelation to the mystics who these people are. We actually know it from the early church as well, that the two men, specifically the brothers of Jesus, are Joseph and Simon. Simon became a disciple of Jesus before Joseph, and both of them in the end became bishops of Jerusalem and martyrs. So that's why I say we have it in the martyrology of the church. This is not private information. So at this particular stage, these men have the same understanding of Jesus as anybody else. So they're coming from the level of below. So they're looking at it from a worldly point of view. And they don't realize that they actually present Jesus with another one of the temptations. And that is that if you want to be seen, go and show yourself to the whole world. Nowadays, if somebody wants to be known, we would say, go on television, let everybody see you. That's the worldly way of doing things. God does things very differently. If you consider that Mary of Nazareth lived a completely private life until the few times she came out and actually joined Jesus in his ministry, she's the most famous woman who ever lived. And many, many, many of our saints, both men and women, lived quiet lives, hidden away in monasteries or in convents, and they became the great saints of the church and became known to absolutely everybody. God's way of dealing with things and our way are very different. So doing things the world's way is not actually the solution. Doing things God's way is the solution. So the brothers don't know that Jesus will go to Jerusalem in a year's time. Well, not quite a year now because we're in Tabernacles. In a few short months, Jesus will in fact go to Jerusalem, and he will do something that the whole world will know about for all time. It will appear as if he's doing the most unworldly thing you could imagine, which is sacrificing himself on a cross. And yet he said himself that it was when I am lifted up from the earth that the whole world will come to me. So the family at this particular stage are in a very different place to Jesus. Jesus is just misunderstood by everybody. Okay, so let me give you a tiny little word about the temptations of Jesus in John's Gospel. In Matthew and Luke, you get the temptations of Jesus given to you all in bulk in chapter 4 of each of those Gospels. But what John does is he tells you not only was the trial of Jesus done in public in front of absolutely everybody, but also the temptations came to him not just directly through Satan, but through human beings. In other words, John is saying that the way temptations come to us is the same way that they came to Jesus. For example, in John 6:15, the people wanted to make Jesus king. And the corresponding thing to that in the synoptics is Matthew 4:8, where Satan offered Jesus the kingdoms of this world. And whether the temptation came from Satan directly or from human beings, Jesus said absolutely no. The second one is chapter 6, verse 34. The people want miraculous bread all the time. Well, in Matthew 4:3, Satan asked Jesus to turn stones into bread, to make miraculous bread. And everybody would know you're really special if you can do this. Jesus said no. That's not why he came. So here in chapter 7, the relatives tell Jesus to show his power to everybody. Well, back in Matthew chapter 4, verse 5, Satan told Jesus to jump off the parapet of the temple and display himself to everybody, and that he could fall and not hurt himself. And everybody would take this spectacular sign as the fact that he was somebody very special. So, as I've just said, whether the temptation came directly through Satan or whether it came through human beings, Jesus' response was the same. I only do what my Father tells me to do. I only say what my Father tells me to say. The Father and I are one. And I want the world to know that I love the Father, and therefore I do exactly what my Father tells me. John says, and this is chapter 7 and verse 5, not even his brothers had faith in him at this particular stage. And so Jesus' response to his brothers was, the right time for me has not come yet, but any time's okay for you. Isn't that interesting? Why is any time okay for them? Because they're still at the level of below. They're still in the cosmos, thinking the same as everybody else, so it won't really matter. Anyway, the Judean leaders are not looking for them. The Judean leaders are only looking for Jesus to kill him. Why? Because Jesus is showing them up all the time, and that Jesus is showing them what false shepherds they are, and that they are not obeying the scriptures that they proclaim to everybody else. Now, the right time for me has not come. This is a very important point. There's two words used in the Gospels for time. One is chronos, from which we get the word in English, chronology. That means you have to have morning before evening, and you have to have Monday before Tuesday, and youth before old age, chronology. The strange thing is that the Gospels are not really interested in that. They're interested in a completely different word, and it's kairos. And kairos is God's chosen time to intervene in human affairs at any particular time. And this kairos is so special that it doesn't follow chronos. For example, the angel came to our Blessed Mother before she was married, while she was still a virgin. That's too soon. And the angel came to Elizabeth when she was old and unable to bear children. That was too late. So according to the way the cosmos thinks, kairos is wrong. But according to the way God operates on the level of above, kairos is right. So Jesus says, you can go anytime. That's the chronos. I have to go at a particular time. I have to go at the right moment. God is never in a hurry, but he's always on time. That's the amazing thing. And so in verse 6, it was not the right time for Jesus, okay? And the reason is that Jesus said, the world can't hate you because you're part of it. But it does hate me because I give evidence that its ways are evil. So here's one of the main reasons which the Jewish leaders would never acknowledge for killing Jesus. And it is that Jesus, the light, showed up the darkness. Every time Jesus appeared, he showed them where they were wrong. And they didn't want that at all. They had no intention of changing. They had no intention of repenting or giving themselves to God. So Jesus said to them, go up to the festival yourselves. I'm not going to this festival because for me the time is not ripe yet. Having said this, he stayed behind in Galilee. So you get the impression here that Jesus isn't going. But he actually does go, but he wants to go in a hidden way, in a silent way, and he wants to simply appear among them. Well, that's how God works. God comes very silently. One moment you think he's not there, and then he's there, revealing himself. We discover this in prayer. We discover this at Mass. We discover this in all our dealings with him, that he comes quietly. So, from verse 10, however, after his brothers had left for the festival, Jesus went up as well, but quite privately. So, what is Jesus doing here? He's absolutely refusing to do what his family asked him to do, which was to make a spectacular entrance. I've arrived. This is not the time. Jesus is going to make a spectacular entrance, but it's not the time. That will be in chapter 18 when he enters Jerusalem officially as the Messiah. But this is not the time. This is way too much out of time. So that's why he can say to them, anytime's okay for you, but it's not for me. This is not the time for the entry into Jerusalem. So he goes up quite privately. In other words, he goes up as a private citizen, a man who has an obligation to attend this festival. And it's only there that he will reveal himself as to who he really is. So Jesus went up to the temple and he began to teach. Now, what went on a daily basis in the temple is that the rabbis would gather in the temple and they would teach either in the court of the women, if they only wanted to teach the people of Israel, or if they wanted to teach everybody, they would teach in the court of the Gentiles. So you know which one Jesus preferred, the court of the Gentiles, where everybody could come to him. So they would simply go to one of the pillars and they would just stand there until people would gather around them, and then they began to teach. This was normal practice. So Jesus went in and he just went to one of the pillars and people gathered around him. The Jews were astonished. Now, this is the Jewish leaders. And they said, how did he learn to read? He has not been taught. Now, here you have them at their insulting best. This is verse 15. Why do they say, how did he learn to read? Every Jewish boy had to be able to read and recite the first 5 books of the Bible for their bar mitzvah. And their bar mitzvah celebration was at the age of 12. So to say, how did he learn to read, is a deliberate insult And it is a very, very terrible insult because every man could read. And every one of them had to pass their bar mitzvah. And so they said, he has not been taught. That means he has not been taught by us. And what they're really saying is he has no right to stand there and teach because he's not one of us. Prejudice speaking, hatred speaking, rejection speaking. I'll give you lots more drama when you come again. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht dé live. Goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World Podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.